Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld, counting you down to the closing bell. And here to help take us beyond the bell, it's a global simulcast. Rejoined right now by our friends Massar and Madison Mills. Welcome to all of our audiences across our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio originals, and for those folks streaming on YouTube. The S&P has been on the back foot all day. We're probably going to end relatively unchanged here on the day, Carol. But I think it's interesting. A lot of the price action still screams defensive. Yep. A lot of the price action still screams, quite frankly, uncertainty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which is kind of interesting then to see so much conviction behind the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index. I know I talked about it earlier, but this is where you're seeing some really strong outperformance. We just talked with our Ian King about what's going on, and really mixed news if you look at what happened with TSM and then also Samsung. But nonetheless, most of the names in the stocks today, Maddie, are higher.
But just so interesting thinking about the tech sector as we head into earnings. I know we're on banks this week, and then we're going to get tech a little bit later on. But will the fundamentals of these tech companies support the recent rally that we've seen? We asked that question in our MLive survey. The majority of respondents said no, that the fundamentals just aren't there right now, Katie.
Well, I mean, that gets to the question, what is going to drive this market? For the past several quarters, the past several years, you could argue that it's mostly macro forces. Whether that switch to some of those fundamentals you're talking about, those earnings reports, remains to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about sort of how you sort of get those sort of catalysts, whether it's upside catalysts or maybe potentially downside catalysts, but it's just not really there right now. And I think a lot of people have already started to look past some of the economic data, particularly when it comes to these inflation reports. They really do want to hear from these companies, and they want to hear how they're holding up in what most people assume is going to be a potentially recessionary environment here. We do get the closing bells here in New York, seeing Whitestone Reed actually ringing the bell there over at the main big board, the NYSE, a Dow Jones Industrial Average higher on the day by 100 points, or roughly 0.3%. The S&P 500, which had been oscillating between gains and losses for a good portion of the day, is going to finish higher, but only by about 4 points, or about 0.1% higher here on the day. And we should point out, this still remains a relatively tight trading range that we've been in for the S&P. NASDAQ is going to finish the day relatively unchanged, down roughly about 3.5 points on the day, and the Russell 2000. Carol Massar, that's your relative outperformer on the day, higher by 1%.
Well, that's really significant to see those small caps outperform. Another group that showed some outperformance today, at least certainly compared with the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, is your bank names. The KBW Bank Index up about 0.8%. And Katie, I am definitely thinking about bank earnings later on this week.
Oh, big time. Don't rush us, though. It's only Monday. You know, we have a few days to
yeah, but
draw
if we get to
out
Wednesday, Thursday, then we get to Friday really quickly.
That's true. That's true. We're almost there if you think about the grand fullness of time. But in any case, let's take a look at the industry groups. You had slightly more winners than losers. Up at the top, it's what Carol was talking about earlier. It's those semiconductor names. Even though we had a double dose of bad news, you think about what we got from TSMC, what we got from Samsung, still the likes of Micron, the likes of Western Digital powering that group higher. Capital goods also catching a bid today. Think Capital, or rather Caterpillar, think Deere, consumer durables as well. And then you go down to the list to some of the underperformers. It's tech hardware, it's media and entertainment, down about 0.8 to 1%, Carol.
All right, so some little moves there, and certainly in some of the decliners, but here's some really outperformance. We continue to talk about it throughout the day, and that is the semiconductor space. Micron Technology, check it out, everybody, pretty much closing just off its highs of the session, up about 8% in today's trade. You had Samsung coming out, pledging to cut memory chip production. And so you've seen other players in the space. You reduce supply. That means potentially a lot of these players can charge more, and that is something that is seen as certainly a positive. So a name like Micron, it is top in the S&P and NASDAQ 100. Western Digital also top in the S&P 500 today. Charles Schwab, I want to take you to that one. Up almost 5% on the day. It's really been beaten up over those bank worries and deposit worries, outperforming, I guess you could say, the broader market by a mile. After saying it took in over $53 billion of core net new client assets in March, it is still down roughly 40% year to date, much of it happening in the last month amid those worries over the bank sector overall. One more rallying on heavy volume, Cinemark Holdings up 6.6%. Thank you, Super Mario Brothers movie and Air and John Wick Chapter 4 also still performing at the box office over the weekend. Movie theater chain saying that April 8th captured the highest single day of attendance for the company since Christmas Day of 2019. So again, Cinemark, Maddie, up 6.6%. You didn't go to the movie. I didn't go to the movie. Did you guys go to the movies?
No.
Okay.
Mario Brothers, it's not exactly my speed, but thank you for asking.
We need to do a team trip.
That's the one with the big gorilla, and they just, what did they do? Was this live action?
Wait, are you talking about Super Mario or Air?
Talking about
No, I was talking about Air.
That's about Nike.
I can't. Yeah.
All right.
Just ignore me, Maddie.
If it's not a rom-com, I'm
with
sorry. I'm not gonna do it if it's
Super
not a
Mario
rom-com.
Brothers
I'm
is
really
a
sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
Decliners.
Let's get to the story we've been talking about all day here with Apple leading the PC shipment plunge with shipments down 40%. Guys, we had a guest on earlier, our BI tech analyst, saying that this is about that demand surging during the pandemic. We had a little bit oversupply correction, but that's a big question, right? Is this a correction in the supply-demand equation, or is this a dip in demand, even compared with pre-pandemic levels that we're going to continue to see? We also have Tesla down on Monday after marking down the price tag of U.S. vehicles yet again in an effort to boost demand. That's the second broad-based price cut this year alone with Tesla, and sales have lagged production for at least 3 quarters now on Tesla. And then we've been talking about this TSMC second consecutive quarterly sales miss against expectations, down by about 1.3% on the close, and that weighing down at U.S. ADRs as well today. You
did see the VIX elevated. You did see some modest strength in the dollar versus most of its major peers, and you did see a bit of a sell-off in the Treasury space. The move up in yields was modest, to be sure, roughly about 2 basis points across the board, but that 2-year yield, if you're into psychological levels, now back above 4%. A lot of people making a bet here that the Fed's job is far from over here, and this is a big part of the reason why you saw not only stocks here in the U.S., but really across the globe pulling back just a little bit here on this Monday afternoon. I thought it was interesting, too, guys. We haven't really talked about it, but I thought the note out by Michael Hartnett, I think it came out technically last Thursday here over at Bank of America, talking about this idea that, in his words, that investors are just way too focused right now on timing the peak in rates and the potential cuts by central banks that could come, and they've really kind of taken their eyes off the ball when it comes to economic conditions and recessionary conditions.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you think about sort of the focus, this mono focus on where the terminal rate will be, I think it's telling that. I mean, Romaine, in two conversations we've had today, what is more important, inflation this week or bank earnings? People said bank earnings. So it's sort of seen that maybe that's a done deal. We know roughly where the Fed is going to end up. What happens after the terminal, whether we start to see cuts, that second part of the conversation is really moving into focus.
Well, I guess I would say, and just rolling into a conversation we had with our Mike McKee, and just trying to cross what's going on in the financial markets versus what's going on with the economic backdrop, and just talking about Fed policy as a result of all of that, that even if, the markets are pointing to, rate cuts and a recession, he says, listen, we know what the Fed's focus is, and that is reining in inflation, and that's got to be top of mind for them. And we need to think about that as investors when you think about valuations.
Yeah, well, I thought, Romaine, you made the great point earlier as well that we are probably not going back to that zero interest rate environment anytime soon. So what are we going to see companies doing and changing to adjust to that? Yeah,
and I think that's the real question, too. We keep talking about what the terminal rate is, but I think that if you do anticipate rates coming down, that question really becomes what's sort of that bottom. I mean, it's not going to be 1% or 0% before. We were speaking with Priya Misra over at TD a little bit earlier. I think, I hope I don't misquote her, but I think she said somewhere around 2.8% was kind of their model that they have over at the bank there.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just thinking about how behavior might change, this is where it gets into a sort of a squishy part of markets where you kind of have to think about these qualitative aspects, how psychology might change. That's why these executive calls, the earnings calls that we get, are so important to actually hear from the C-suite about how they're thinking beyond what just the numbers say.
Well, you know what I love, Maddie? So when I was looking at this, I just had to look it up for you about Super Mario Brothers. So he's squaring off against Bowser, but they make a point here that he gets help from his mate, Princess Peach.
Wow.
So it is kind of a
So it is a rom-com.
So they are a couple. I'm not very well read on Mario lore.
Yeah,
well, so I mean, thank you for that.
I'm not endorsing the movie, but, I mean, if you're into rom-coms, there it is for you.
Well, I mean, we need to all go, clearly.
I mean,
we need to skip a
I don't think John
show.
Wick is a rom-com. Or Air.
that our new economic market indicator?
You didn't play this game growing up, Romaine? Really? No
Donkey
Nintendo?
Kong? Yes. I'm old enough to remember Donkey Kong, so you're going to age me out here. But by the time the other one came along, I think I was a little too old. But that's enough about me.
No, listen.
I grew up in the Pong days.
We love talking about you, Romaine. But having said that, I agree with Katie.
That was high technology.
Static on the line. But I agree with you, Katie, that I'm really curious to see what CEOs have to say about the outlook, especially those big bank CEOs.
Oh, is Carol speaking?
I've got 4 brothers, man, and you, like,
you
louder than them.
Hey, did you know, Carol, today is National Siblings Day? Did you know that? You should go thank your brothers.
I love my siblings.
Exactly.
2 sisters.
Say that in the
There's a lot of
chat.
siblings.
Wait, you have 4 brothers and 2 sisters?
Yeah,
a lot of Massars.
A lot of Massars.
We do a lot for the economy on a regular basis. It's a lot. All right, we got to run. Guys, our conversation will continue.
We have a lot to talk about after the show.
We do.
See you later. All right, we'll be back tomorrow. Our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. Beyond the Bell.
Wow.
Romaine, stop. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody.